got time for questions, queries, commentary, what have you.
It's working? Okay.
We'll take 2 or 3 questions. Questions, not lectures. They're all positive. I do appreciate Dr. West's presentation. It's always magnificent. But it's also a philosophy conference. And in that grade, they consider to engage in some dialogue and discussion. Because in many ways, it's a matter of edification. And we all engage in that dialogue. So if you have a question, please come up and use the mic. Your name and campus association.
My name is Talaba Sanbu. Dr. West, thank you for coming here. And as a native of, well, not a native, but from Sacramento, California, I want to share with you my happiness to see you here.
My homegirl is in the house.
Dr. West, I'm a social studies teacher in Harlem at Watley. And I don't know if you know about the debacle that's going on with the New York Board of Education. But could you address now for us, or I'm sure you're aware of, mandatory recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance now in public schools for the purpose of instilling patriotism in our children?
Right now before the Supreme Court fairly soon as well. But I think it's part of the, but just stay here so I can look at you. Don't say, we might have a dialogue or something, you know what I mean? There you go. That, I mean, it's part of the patriotic wave. It's an attempt to superficially impose a certain kind of unity because of the fear and paranoia, which is quite understandable. It's a vicious attack, World Trade Center and so forth. But it's a pornographic patriotism, to use a language that my dear friend James Forbes. It's just like pornography. It's just for a little cheap pleasure, for a moment. You see, whereas serious patriotism looks about the long run to make sure that in fact it cuts all the way down. So you see all of the flags flying and all the businesses get in on how much they love America and so forth and so on. And as soon as a major policy goes against them, they get upset and the flags come down and the businesses go back. You see what I mean? I mean, a real patriot is somebody like Martin King. Martin King was a fundamental patriot. But he was not a pornographic patriot. He wanted the real thing. He wanted the real America, the best of America. And he died fighting for it. You see what I mean? Well, that's something else. Now, some of us are not patriots at all. I'm not a patriot. I'm a Christian, which means all flags must be subordinate to the cross. That's the kind of Christian I am. And I'm an internationalist. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Democrat internationalist, which means I'm suspicious of all forms of nationalism. I don't care what it is. American nationalism, German nationalism, Zionism, which is a legitimate form of Jewish national self-determination, black nationalism, Brother Karenga, we've been debating for 30 years. Because he's one of the major black nationalists in the country. There's no doubt about it. I love him to death. Ain't no doubt about it, but I'm not a Nazi. But of course, I know that democracy came into the modern world in the shell of the nation state. So as a Democrat, I've got to deal with democratic energies in every nation state. You see? So if you got Jewish nationalism, I go into the state of Israel, I say, I like talk about rights and liberties and so forth. That's democratic energy. If the Arabs are second-class citizens, I'm against that. That's right. If you don't allow interfaith and interracial marriages, I'm against that. I go back into Germany. I go into German nation state. I like the democratic energies. I promote that. If they're non-democratic, I criticize that. Black nationalists are my comrades if they're progressive, if they're concerned about class and patriarchy and homophobia, as is Brother Maulana Karenga. No doubt about that. They're comrades, but they still call themselves nationalists. I say, I don't like the category. But I got to deal with it because it's the most powerful ideology in the modern world. But I take a stand as a Christian. That a Christian is suspicious of all forms of idolatry, including the flag. reason when I see all these flags waving, I say I know they can mean a lot of different things for different people, so I don't impose anything. But I just want to see what kind of fruit it's bearing. And all this mandatory recitation and so forth and so on. If we're doing it under segregated conditions in vanilla suburbs and chocolate cities, it is not resulting in education being elevated among the folk who don't have access to the schools in the way they are, don't have enough resources, the community itself is already debilitated, then you don't need to recite the damn thing. I want to know what is your content, what's your substance. That's like somebody tell you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Keep kicking you behind. I love you, I love you, I love you. Keep kicking you behind. Well, when are you going to prove it? Well, maybe on Friday I'll take you to dinner. It's empty. Empty. Vacuous. But people change. Nations change. Societies can change if we work fight hard enough. Oh, Brother Akili, how you doing there?
Akili Buchanan.
Yes, indeed. This is my dear brother from Princeton, California, and other places.
I appreciate the analysis you were trying to make about niggerization and the glow of understanding from our experience. But what I have a problem with is how can they truly understand what it is like to have been enslaved when America, we can clearly explain why America is hated around the world. So the issue of niggerization gets to the very existential issue. I didn't do anything wrong. I was enslaved for no reason. I've been enslaved because I'm black. But we can answer why America is hated around the world. It's imperialist, it's racist, it's classist, and it has created empire. So can it really learn from niggerization, from our experience?
Yeah, good question, good question. Appreciate you pushing that too, though. Two things, though. I think we have to distinguish between the various responses to niggerization, no matter how long niggerization has been in place. I mean, America's been niggerized as a nation, let's say, since 9/11, that's 2 years, versus 400 years. But it's the response. You can respond to niggerization, given a 2-year period, you can respond to niggerization over 400 years. And of course, there's a number of responses, but it's the dominant response that I'm talking about. It's the dominant response I'm talking about. Now, the question is, how difficult is it for people to learn from other folk who've been niggerized? I think that's a very tough question. I think it's a very tough question. I think all we can do is try to both engage dialogue and bear witness and try to convince folk that they're actually headed toward a dead end, that it's in their interest to listen to us. Now, if they think they can get away with it and they think that somehow it's working, then they may not listen. But we've seen that before. We've seen that before. You know, Frederick Douglass and others told you know what? If you all don't deal with this slavery issue, you might lose your democracy. Oh, come on, Fred, get up. Have a drink. You're pushing it. You're always exaggerating, engaging in hyperbolic language. He said, no, this thing's going to shake the foundations of your nation. Turned out to be right. You see? Fannie Lou Hamer said the same thing in the 60s. So that, you see what I'm saying, Akili? I think that it's going to be difficult for persons to learn, but I think that's all we have. You see, the only alternative to hatred, bloodshed, bigotry, is dialogue and rule of law. And they're always fragile. They're always fragile. The immense barbarism of various sorts always casts that night-like condition and that citadel of moral and spiritual and political nobility for Democrats is dialogue, rule of law, equal status, rights, liberties. These are always fragile, any historical moment. But that's the only alternative we have. I think that's one of the reasons why, indeed, somebody like Martin King knew, in fact, that to be a truth teller, and most importantly, to be a free person, let alone a free black man, means that you better be ready for death any moment. Because it's too much for the world, especially America. It's hard for America to really stand a free black man or woman. It's the last thing they want to see. And for some black folk, they can't stand to see a free black man or woman. Because people escape from freedom, the burden of freedom is too overwhelming. They want to be told what to do. They want to fall behind and enlist or they want to conform, and they want to be complacent and think they can waltz through life and skate through history. And people come along with this parhesion of freedom and say, you scared me to death. Yeah, that's what freedom is. It's just like love. People just want to fall in love and don't want to be afraid. You never fall in love. You don't take a risk. That's what it's about, vulnerability, right? Y'all know about falling in love.
We're going to have two more questions.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
I want to raise a question about nationalism because I thought it was a good forum, and I appreciate what you said. Certainly, I respect what you said. But don't you see that one of the reasons you have suspicion of nationalism is because you identify with its pathologies rather than its promise and positive practice? What it would be like is if I identified Christianity with George Bush and Hitler, rather than identifying it with Martin Luther King and Cornel West. So what we have to do, it seems to me, is to make a distinction between liberational nationalism and oppressive nationalism. You were talking about the Jews. When the Jews were simply wanting to constitute themselves, you can appreciate that. But when they need to constitute themselves at the expense of Palestine and Palestinian people, that's a problem.
That's right.
Let's give it if I'm wrong. I think it's very important for us to not equate the pathologies of a philosophy with its positive aspect. We don't do that with Marxism. We don't reduce Marxism to Stalinism.
Or Leninism or whatever. That's absolutely right.
All the pathologies. So I'm asking for the same latitude for nationalism. And don't say I accept it because it's a powerful force. Accept it because it seeks to recover and bring forth the best of what it means to be African and human in the fullest sense. Speak that special culture truth to the world and make our own unique contribution to the forward flow of human history.
Let me come back, my brother. What you call liberatory nationalism is what I call the democratic elements in nationalism. See what I mean? So that I would never want to confine any form of nationalism simply to its worst. That's why I say progressive nationalists are my comrades to the degree to which they accent the democratic elements and the democratic potentials or possibilities of nationalism. And so in that sense, what you call oppressive nationalism, I call the democratic elements in nationalism, but I do it as a Democrat. See?
You mean liberation?
I mean, the emancipatory liberatory. That's right. The emancipatory liberatory.
That's right.
So that in that sense, but then the question would be, what is at stake in still calling yourself a nationalist? We're going to take more time.
Because there's a history. There's Malcolm and Garvey and Maria Stewart and Henry Vincent David. There's a history. It's the same reason I don't give up black history. I have a responsibility to bear both the burden and glory of my history. I see myself as carrying on a legacy. And that's a legacy of a nation. It's not a legacy of just scattered people. I use nation as a synonym for peoplehood. Nationalism is a symbolism for love of the people, which you praise.
But Brother Maulana, but you accept that nationalism is a modern ideology coming out of Europe, in part responding to Napoleonic invasions in Europe, and therefore you're appropriating a particular ideology that had to do with conflicts in Europe for the use of the same ends and aims that you and I are talking about when they're democratic ones, right? Now, why would you hold on to that notion?
Okay, we could all get back to Christianity.
Yeah.
We are using English, so we talk about English.
Yes,
And how we
yes.
distinguish ourselves from other English-speaking people is by framing it in our own language. I said earlier, as Malcolm said, that the logic of the oppressed must be different than the logic of the oppressor if we want liberation. But a liberational logic requires a liberational language. So we have to give the language to what it means to be a nationalist. And so I'm keeping the tradition alive.
Yeah.
I don't want to
No. But I think it's useful for all of us. That's what I want to do. No, I appreciate that. Definitely. Well, just one quick word about Christianity, though. Just one quick word about Christianity. That Christianity is a movement that comes out of Judaism around a particular Jewish brother of swarthy complexion. But he's in the Middle East. He predates Europe. There's no construct of Europe. Britain is just a province of the Roman Empire many hundreds of years after the emergence of this particular Jewish brother, who then has a movement around him as he breaks from the Judaism from which he comes. But the crucial question is not even the origin or the color or the features, but what kind of life does he live, and what kind of message does he send to the world? Being put to death by the vicious Roman Empire as a political prisoner after he's gone into the temple, entering Jerusalem before he weeps for Jerusalem, and then generates a movement therefrom.
But it's not what Malcolm said.
Yes.
The European has appropriated Christianity.
Yes.
Malcolm said when the white man brags he's being white, when he brags he's being a Christian, he's bragging that he is a white man. So he has so equated Christianity with whiteness, it takes a miracle. Fannie Lou Hamer, and Martin Luther King, and all those other Christians, Benjamin and Neil Turner, actually extracted from the racism.
But the thing is, Maulana, your grandfather, my grandfather, your grandmother, my grandmother, they were part of that miracle that exposed the vicious forms of idolatry of those particular Europeans who bastardized the Christian message that came from that particular Jewish brother.
When the black philosophers get strong enough, they'll go beyond Judaism to look for the roots of Christianity, and they'll find it in ancient Egypt.
Oh, no, you can't talk about the Middle East without talking about Egypt. And we appreciate your work and Brother Hillier and others. We know that. But that's true for Plato too. That's true for Plato too, with Pythagoras in Egypt and Herodotus and others talking about that. But again, the question becomes, is not just from whence it comes, but it's what it is.
That's what nationalism is.
Yeah, we don't want genetic fallacy here. Absolutely. All right. Thank you for your patience.
On that same note, it's like Tantra Yoga that came out of Hindu, where the Hindu Kush or the Hindu blacks created Tantra Yoga. But Sigmund Freud called it the libido energy. We never really learned how to use that because it kept a secret from it. But my question is this. In Western society, using Western concepts and constructs, okay, I think we have to develop different constructs. Just like the brother said, if the language is Western, the ideology is Western, I'm putting on a Western coat, which may not fit me.
But it looks pretty good on the net.
What I'm saying to you, if there's a dog and a cat, and I'm a cat, all right, and I'm living in Dorcas, right, and you're a dog, but when I look at you because I think I'm a cat, I call you nigger. You understand where I'm coming from? So the whole point is we have to develop a construct. What I'm saying is this here. Even if you talk about Christianity, it's still a Western concept. And for the Democrat or the Democrats, the demons that rule, that's what the word means.
Democrat. That's a new one, though. You coming up with new language on your spot. I hear you, brother. But let me put it this way, though. The important thing to keep in mind is that most black folk we know, most people of African descent we know, let's say here in Newark, dream in English. that right? Most of them. And we got some Ethiopian brothers and sisters dreaming Amharic, and some of the Caribbean folks may dream in Spanish and French. We dream in English. Now, the question, look, language itself has a variety of different possibilities and modalities. Part of the African appropriation of the language of Milton and Shakespeare, as well as Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, because English is now the possession and ownership in part of Curtis Mayfield, Aretha Franklin, Robert Hayden, the great poet, and black philosophers as well. We have creatively made a contribution to the English language through American language and so forth. So that means that languages can move, they can change. So we don't want to say just Western language, Western concept as if it's monolithic. There's a lot of possibilities within that language. All we gotta do is listen to some rap music and see that. They're using this language in all kind of different ways that we know that the originators of English didn't have in mind. The English, the of the 20th century is going to steal away to listen to you play. Just because it's a European instrument, art catered for Toledo, Ohio, ought you not play it? That's all I got. Listen to this. And no European ever played it like that. And no other black person ever played it like that. He's that kind of genius.
This is the last question, and if there are a person waiting for the shuttle bus and be moving for Robert Trent Hotel, it'll be leaving shortly after.
Good evening.
Yeah, you do.
I really enjoyed your talk. My question is, you mentioned the term Christian humanist, and I was wondering what you meant by that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you can imagine, no, that's a deep question. We could have a long seminar together on that, you know. But let me put it this way, that by Christian humanist, what I mean is someone who takes a deep commitment to what is often called paideia. Paideia consists of three things. It's the formation of attention to certain kind of questions like the problem of evil. Like, why do people suffer so? Like, what is the meaning of death? The formation of attention, that you focus on that. And then you try, in wrestling with those questions, to link it to how to live, the question that was raised by the great Tony Sanchez in the poetry. How to live. So that you cultivate yourself. For what? To be a more mature, wiser soul willing to serve. You see. Now that is one part of it. Paideia. That's more of the humanist part. Now the Christian part has to do with it. I always understand, and this is where we argue, I always understand the Christian part as starting with the Hebrew Bible. And I take seriously the specificity of Judaism. And what Judaism contributes to the world in part is not only a Mago Dei, made in the image of God, equal status, equal sanctity, but linked to a covenant of a God with an oppressed people that believes, in fact, that those who Sly Stone call ordinary people, those who James Cleveland called, Sly Stone called them everyday people, James Cleveland called them ordinary people, that their lives are shot through with the deepest sense of the tragic, the problematic, and the sublime as anybody else's lives. These are three great contributions of the Hebrew Bible. There's others, but those are three. Because when you look at the characters in the Hebrew Bible, Joseph, Noah, Adam and so forth, they're ordinary people. They're not like Odysseus or Achilles, or in some of the earlier stories and myths going back before the Greeks. It was well-to-do. Even Sophocles' tragedies are for the well-to-do families. The Oedipus and company, you see. But when it gets to ordinary people, see, that's the democratic stuff for Christians. So then by the time Jesus emerges from the artisanal class, his father's a carpenter. Right? He's demeaned, he's marginalized. He's not as bad as the slaves, but he's not from the top at all. And then what does he do? He goes around subverting every major hierarchy, the very notion of common eating. See, most cultures are predicated on notions of cuisine in which the rich have access to certain kind of food and the poor have access to other kind of food. Jesus said anybody could come to the table. No matter who you are, it's common eating. They thought he lost his mind. And then it was free healing. Usually you had to go through a process if you wanted to get healed. So the poor people were always in the back because they were the last ones to be healed. Jesus said, no, somebody touch me. Who is it? I don't care what class they are. I got And we kind of laugh, but there's implications here. I mean, America needs this in terms of its health insurance policy, right? We got 42 million fellow citizens can't get access to health care. That's the egalitarian implication, you see. So that once you get this paideia on the one side, and this Christian notion parasitic in part on certain elements of Judaism, but also attempts to go beyond it in the sense of expanding it beyond a particular people. Then you've got something that's fascinating. Now, I would argue that even the various rich secular ideologies that I take very seriously, like Marxism. I mean, Marx was a Jewish brother. He grew up in the Catholic region. His father turned Protestant, so he grew up a Protestant. You know, he wrote an essay when he was 17 years old, Jesus Christ, Liberator of the World. Like a good Lutheran, but he had a left-wing twist. But he had a thick Christology, you know, as Lutherans do. But he was affected by progressive politics. Now, as he became more radically secular, he called certain cognitive commitments to Christianity into question, but he always held on to the prophetic juices of an Amos, the egalitarian implications of free healing, common eating. Let's just institutionalize it, let's structuralize it in such a way that no poverty, access to education free, healthcare free. Marx, you must be dreaming. Was Amos dreaming? Was Micah dreaming? Was Jesus dreaming? But he was in dialogue with understanding the complexities of modern industrial societies, which means that in a way even Marxism itself becomes unintelligible without that backdrop, which is in part religious and also humanist. And there are figures in the Christian humanist tradition that, like Erasmus, Jonathan Swift, I think Martin King was actually a Christian humanist, but he was a patriot too, though. You see, Martin was of an older generation. The difference between somebody like Christian humanists like Martin and Christian humanists like myself is the mediation of Malcolm for me. See, because Malcolm learned from Elijah Muhammad that one must not be disappointed in America. One must lower one's expectations about America. Martin had high expectations for America, so that the high moment of his dream could be transformed to the low moment of his nightmare. Yeah. I've seen enough nightmares growing up that I don't have high expectations. Doesn't mean I hate the country. People say, oh, you anti-American. No, I'm just pro-humanity. Hey. That's all. And if I'm critical of America, I'm critical of any other nation state. You see? But Malcolm taught me that America is a civilization deeply shaped by white supremacist values, sensibilities. It can be changed, but don't be so disappointed, disillusioned, just because white supremacy raises its ugly head, or male supremacy, or wealth inequality, or whatever. Just learn to live with the lower expectations even as you intentionally engage. So you won't end up impotent and powerless and paralyzed. That's again like the blues. There's nothing that could happen in America that could quench my fire. Nothing. And it's partly because I've been keeping track of the worst of it for so long. And Malcolm was the same way. Malcolm was never disappointed in America. You know, he knew it for what it was. He just thought it might have some more potential. That's all. When the great Du Bois left America, what did he say? 95 years old, the greatest freedom fighter of African descent. He looked back on the bus, on the boat and said, the Negro in America can never win alone. I'm going to Africa. Africa must rise before the Negro in America rises. It's a very deep point. It's a powerful point. We had to wrestle with it. It ought to be that Garveyite skeleton in all of our closets and wrestling with Du Bois, who started NAACP with these high expectations, and he ends up in chains in February 1952. With the same government that he had invested such high hopes in. Some of us not going to go that route. We're not going to have high expectations. We're going to say,
You know what? Americans are just human beings like everybody else. It's a fascinating democratic experiment that makes some great breakthroughs, but also has deep blindnesses, and will push for the democratic energies, but I have no high expectations whatsoever. And if somehow you find me and Maulana and the rest of us in jail, you ought not be surprised. It'd just be America acting at its worst, as it often has done when Negroes speak out with freedom.
All right. On that note, thank you very much for attending the Gospel Border Struggle 10th Annual Conference. We'll be back here again tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We hope to see you again. Thank you again.
How are you doing? How are you? Nice to meet you. How are you doing?
From the bibliophiles and my good friend, and we're more bibliophiles.
Oh, yeah. What a group of games. Oh, I came over here.
Right.
Yes.
That white space.
Yes, I came over. That was beautiful. Yeah, very nice.
Wasn't it?
Hi, Mr. Drinker. Good, how are you? Captivated? Absolutely. Are copies of the tape going